By April 2020, according to the learned survey analysis research professionals at the Pew Research Center, misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic had spread, and many Americans had encountered conflicting narratives about how the new coronavirus originated. They claimed that scientists have determined the virus came about naturally, but there is some uncertainty about how it first infected people. But a lingering question, despite the assurances of scientists, including a recent paper by 21 internationally renowned virologists and evolutionary biologists from all over the world, upon which Dr. Anthony Fauci, described by Al Jazeera as the trusted voice in the United States in separating fact and fiction as to what is the truth. Should not the assurances of these esteemed scientists have already settled that question? Why do questions still linger? Not according to recent editorial that appeared in America's leading business publication, the Wall Street Journal, and they are now concerned that more than 3 years after the start of the global pandemic, there has yet to be a comprehensive forensic investigation into its origins. And they say, with more than 1 million Americans dead from COVID-19 and an estimated 15 million dead worldwide, that's inexcusable. In the last installment of this video series, we had explored the topic regarding this very question that has pitted persons like Dr. Anthony Fauci and the American president against others, including Sir Richard Dearlove, who had formerly been the head of MI6 from 1999 to 2004, and who had told the Daily Telegraph that Berger Sorensen and Angus Dalglish's research shows that the pandemic may have started at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And he added that he thought it unlikely to have been released deliberately, as well as Dr. Robert Redfield, the former director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who had told CNN he believes the coronavirus originally escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China. And today, according to the Wall Street Journal, mirroring the conclusions of the members of the intelligence community when they had been posed the question by the president in late May 2021, there were two competing hypotheses. Some believe the novel coronavirus probably escaped from a laboratory in Wuhan. Others maintain the virus first jumped to people from caged animals at a Wuhan seafood market. Certainly the opinion of Dr. Christian Anderson of Scripps Research Center, who had written the definitive zoonotic evolution report. However, according to the president, on the first anniversary of the pandemic declaration, when 527,000 American fatalities had been attributed to a novel coronavirus, more American fatalities than both world wars, the conflict in Southeast Asia, and the terror attacks on 9/11. We know what we need to do to beat this virus. Tell the truth. Follow the scientists and the science. Work together, put trust and faith in our government to fulfill its most important function, which is protecting the American people. No function more important. And so, taking the president's advice, for the next few minutes we shall endeavor to trust the science and take the approach first pioneered by Sir Richard Dearlove, the former director of MI6, to examine what may be hidden in open view and contained in these science reports regarding what had been called, almost from the very beginning, a novel or new coronavirus. Framing this inquiry from the starting point, what's new? What's new? What's new about the novel coronavirus? In the very first sentence of the science report, first published on May 29, 2020, upon which Sir Richard Dearlove had relied, a research paper on Biovac, which sounds curiously like Bivouac 19, one of the early candidates competing to become the vaccine product to address this novel coronavirus. Those researchers, Drs. Sorensen and Dalglish, had stated, although no other coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 vaccine design program appears to follow this methodology, we believe from experience that successful vaccine design logically starts with a thorough understanding of the etiology of the target virus, which appears in this case to be quite singular. We believe from experience that successful vaccine design logically starts with a thorough understanding of the etiology of the target virus, which appears in this case to be quite singular. And you may have noticed that there is no Biovac-19 vaccine that emerged as successful. No other COVID-19 vaccine program, they claimed, had adopted what to them had appeared to be a logical approach. And while one could posit that these scientists were simply engaged in some salesmanship, competing against other vaccine candidate developers, this statement raises at least an inference of suspicion as to why only they would be adopting a logical approach, which certainly Sir Richard Dearlove may have picked up on, and which they purport to have been beginning with a thorough understanding of the etiology, a very similar approach to that which would be certainly adopted by a trained intelligence analyst like Sir Richard Dearlove, developing a clear and accurate picture of the threat so as to enable leaders or developers to reasonably calculate a target solution to prevent or mitigate risks, harms, or threats. Take the guesswork out. Don't play the lottery. But going back to the beginning of the outbreak, in Wuhan, 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists had traveled to Wuhan by February 2020. And they had determined in what they described as a major finding regarding this novel coronavirus from 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases, 19 times more cases than had yet been reported in the entire United States by mid-March 2020, that alignment of the full-length genome sequence of the COVID-19 virus and other available genomes of beta coronavirus showed the closest relationship was with the bat SARS-like coronavirus strain, bat CoV RAC-G13, identity 96%. That robust investigation team had concluded, looking at a sample size 19 times larger than any cases that had yet been reported in the United States, that since the COVID-19 virus has a genome identity of 96% to a bat SARS-like coronavirus and 86% to 92% to a pangolin SARS-like coronavirus, an animal source for COVID-19 is highly likely. And looking at the genome and preparing the global response, they had expressly stated, it is not SARS and it is not influenza, providing as an example that COVID-19 transmission in children appears to be limited compared with influenza, while the clinical picture differs from SARS. In fact, with regard to children, these scientists had found that data on individuals aged 18 years old and under suggests that there is a relatively low attack rate in this age group. 2.4% of all reported cases. That would amount to only a little over 1,300 cases for children from over 55,000 reported by mid to late February 2020 in China. In fact, according to this robust analysis report from the World Health Organization, within Wuhan, among testing of ILI, or influenza-like illness samples, no children were positive in November and December of 2019 and in the first 2 weeks of January 2020, by which time, according to the World Health Organization, there were only a total of 41 cases. Only 27 cases by mid-January that had been connected to the Wuhan market, despite the headline news reports that had begun to be broadcasted all around the world about a potential pandemic that was coming. A train that appears to have already left the station. 2.4% of only 55,000 cases is just about 1,300 infected, despite the immediate alarm about getting children vaccinated. And to date, despite over 6.8 million fatalities worldwide, according to the World Health Organization, only 0.4% of the fatalities worldwide involve persons under the age of 20, according to UNICEF, or 17,400 deaths as of February 2023 worldwide. Less than 20,000. According to the World Health Organization, not only the curious coincidence of an outbreak so close to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was also the fact that many hospitals have fever clinics that were established and maintained since the SARS outbreak. And in China, laboratory tests were originally requested according to the case definitions, which included an epidemiological link to Hubei or other confirmed cases. However, by December 30th, 2019, in Wuhan, there had only been a total of 15 cases reported involving that had been described only as a pneumonia of unknown etiology or unknown cause. But according to the World Health Organization, on December 30th, 2019, three bronchoalveolar lavage samples were collected from a patient with pneumonia of unknown etiology, a surveillance definition established following the SARS outbreak of 2002 to 2003 in Wuhan Jinyintan Hospital, or immediately upon discovery of just these three cases in a city with a population from 8 to 11 million, the medical clinicians, before beginning a robust examination of the genome, had already implemented a protocol to utilize the SARS template to distinguish and isolate these new cases of a pneumonia of unknown etiology, which would also raise a reasonable inference of suspicion connected to understanding the etiology of the virus that apparently only Sorensen and Daglish had considered the logical approach to developing the new and amazing vaccine. By January 24, 2020, in a segment featuring Dr. Sanjay Gupta, an American neurosurgeon, medical reporter, and writer who serves as Associate Chief of the Neurosurgery Service at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, Associate Professor of Neurosurgery at the Emory University School of Medicine, member of the National Academy of Medicine and American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and who is the chief medical correspondent for CNN, it was reported that snakes, the Chinese krait, and the Chinese king cobra may be the original source of the newly discovered coronavirus that has triggered an outbreak of deadly infectious respiratory illness in China this winter. And in February 2020, after a robust examination of every animal that had been associated with the wet market in Wuhan, Dr. Wei Ji and others had determined using a species-specific genome test that this novel coronavirus had possessed what scientists would describe as an Ophidian codon usage bias, and that is new. 4. Although there are over 3,000 coronaviruses unique to avian species, generally giving rise to lower respiratory tract infections, like the avian bronchitis affecting chickens that had led to the filtering of the first coronavirus in 1932 and its identification in 1936. And there are over 3,000 unique to mammalian species, which generally give rise to gastric infections. There are absolutely no coronaviruses that affect the reptilian species, like snakes, apparently a scientific fact about which Dr. Sanjay Gupta on January 24, 2020 may have been unaware when CNN had speculated that these zoonotic source may have been Chinese krait or king cobra, but about which since, even after having been personally contacted regarding the matter, CNN has yet to have issued a retraction or to have disclosed. One characteristic of reptilian and snake genomes further are the presence of what are described by scientists as transposons, which in reptiles act like messenger RNA, possessing an ability to transport themselves to respond to events throughout the body of an animal and equipped with hyper-regenerative or replicative properties or qualities, as has been observed with the novel coronavirus, but which enable reptiles to regenerate limbs after amputation. And this seems less and less like a natural zoonosis event, and rather something very new for this novel coronavirus. By April of 2020, June Wu had raised concerns about more secrecy or silence, noting that at least in the past decades, accumulated scientific findings confirm the pathogenic role of free radicals in damage in respiratory virus infection. Wu explained that free radicals such as superoxide, hydroxyl radicals, nitric oxide, and peroxynitrite are highly active chemical substances that easily react with other molecules, and that they are exceptionally destructive, indiscriminately causing protein deterioration, cell membrane destruction, DNA damage, cell death, and organ failure. And coincidentally, we seem to have scientists still puzzled about why there might be problems with long COVID. Hence, at least for recent disease outbreaks, it is known that virus infection induces massive production of free radicals. And Wu suggested that when discussing the cytokine storm in COVID-19, which many have discussed, it is critical to understand that free radicals, the downstream product of the cytokine storm, are executive factors for direct damage to cells and multiple organs. But according to Wu, by April 2020, astonishingly, very few medical professionals mentioned the crucial role of free radical damage in COVID-19, at least by coincidental correlation or anecdotal evidence, which is not the equivalent of causation. The complications posed by free radicals have been associated with charged or ionized particles, and even Sorensen and Daglish, upon whom Sir Richard Dearlove had relied, had stated as a part of their logical approach in April 2020 that unlike conventionally developed vaccines, Biovac-19's method of operation is upon non-human-like NHL epitopes in 21.6% of the composition of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2's spike protein, which displays respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, which displays distinct distributed charge, including the presence of charged furin-like cleavage site. By January 2021, John Legnicki and others had determined that while the SARS-CoV-2 particle measures up to 1.4 microns, its virials, smaller particles that are drivers of aerosol transmission, range between 0.25 and 0.50 microns. But the virials for this novel coronavirus had displayed an intriguing gain of function, perhaps through natural selection, but potentially related to these findings regarding charged particles, because his study using a standard air sample collector, just the size of an easy pass, with 5 apertures, equipped with 4 chambers of impacting filters designed to render a virus not viable, had found these virials possessing an aberrant from nature ability to defy computational fluid dynamics to mass in the air and find each other, and defy a normalized random distribution when being collected by the air sample collector, the size of an easy pass, with 5 apertures, depositing only chiefly through 1 aperture, providing an optimal advantage to deliver an infectious dose against a point rather than an area target with sufficient exposure, and could, under optimal conditions, render even military and industrial grade respiratory protection, which relies upon a respirator to filter incoming airflow, wholly ineffective, even in an outdoor environment. A novel gain of function for any novel coronavirus to possess. However, subjects like opinion code and usage bias, the curious decision by the clinicians in Wuhan to immediately utilize a SARS template to isolate cases for pneumonias of unknown cause in the absence of a test would present like any other pneumonia, especially with, as of December 30th, 2019, not even 1 fatality in China to distinguish that particular disease presentation as something different than normal, are topics that would be expected to be familiar to epidemiologists, virologists, evolutionary biologists, and microbiologists, and not the layman, which included, according to the Pew Research Center by April 2020, nearly 3 in 10, 29% saying it is most likely the product of a laboratory. But the most obvious clue for even an amateur sleuth was perhaps the one fact hidden in open view about what began quickly to be called not just a novel coronavirus, but a chimeric coronavirus. And under evolutionary pressure of pandemic, some perhaps even an intelligence analyst like Sir Richard Dearlove may have noted that by definition, according to Merriam-Webster, chimeric means relating to, derived from, or being a genetic chimera, containing tissue with 2 or more genetically distinct populations of cells. And a chimera is, by this usage, either an illusion or fabrication of the mind, or an individual, organ, or part consisting of tissues of diverse genetic constitution, like this coronavirus that appears to have not only bat qualities, and pangolin possibly qualities, but also snake, aberrant from nature. And this would be consistent with the findings by Wei Ji, who found not just the 96% similarity to SARS in genome sequencing, but an aberrant from nature opinion codon usage bias, or snake affinity, while coronaviruses only exclusively infect mammals and birds, not snakes, like Chinese krait or king cobra. And the novel coronavirus is only the 7th coronavirus to infect humans, 5 of which between 2003 and 2005 had been suddenly discovered with the emergence of SARS in Hong Kong, which has been associated with a bat coronavirus. And if one may recall from grammar school science, viruses and their virials are the most abundant biological particles in the entire world. But before the emergence of a novel coronavirus that Dr. Fauci and others remain convinced had been the result of an infected zoonotic source coming into contact with a human, there had only been a total of 219 viruses in total that were harmful to mankind, which would make this emergence extremely rare. And that warrants at least a reasonable suspicion when following the science. And yet, when following the scientists, It is of at least probative value that in March 2015, John Barrick and others had collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology to perform research, potentially in dual-use research of concern, on what was specifically described as a SARS-like coronavirus, a peer-reviewed science report about which Dr. Fauci had become sufficiently concerned on February 1st, 2020, a Saturday, to shoot off an urgent email to his deputy at NIAID, Dr. Hugh Auchincloss, an email he sent after receiving an email on a Friday, January 31st, from Dr. Christian Anderson, expressing his concerns that he thought the virus had been the product of a laboratory. In that study, this international collaboration of scientists had not only reported the successful cultivation in vivo, or in tissue, of a SARS-like coronavirus which had been performed on prior occasions, but also in vitro, which would mark the very first virus of any kind to have been successfully cultivated in vitro in history in March 2015, at which time Dr. John Barrick and his colleagues at UNC Chapel Hill were so proud of their discovery that they had immediately applied for patent protection for methodologies to create not just a spike protein, but had expressly described it as a spike protein for a chimeric SARS-like coronavirus. And at least by now, 3 years into a pandemic, we should be familiar with what chimeric means. For as the WHO director had stated at the end of December 2021, surely we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. A virus that, in open view, had been called a novel coronavirus, a coronavirus that had, in open view, been called a chimeric novel coronavirus. And there just happens to be, in a public record, a spike protein for which a patent had been developed, had been submitted for methodologies to create back in March 2015. And be sure to join us next time as events evolve with science in a near-ending pandemic termination that has yet, as of yet, with an estimated 15 million dead worldwide, leaves still many unanswered questions, including exactly how this virus that isn't stupid had, without a prescient thought, and merely through natural selection, managed so quickly and absolutely to have conquered the entire world. This briefing is Unclassified. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.